Hello, Ryan here, and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all of the news from the week just past. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get on with it.
This week, we check in with members of the lighting and ship teams and what they're currently working on, plus a look at the work that is going on for building interiors, including potential player housing and apartments. So this week's Inside Star Citizen was not an Inside Star Citizen, but another Journey to 4.0 special, this time taking a look at the upcoming building interior work. Now these interiors are intended to populate all of the planetary landing zones, like the ones in the Stanton system, but also for any and all that may come up in the future, to provide a multitude of game environments for player use and gameplay. With the players already able to fly around these cityscapes, they remain mostly non-interactable, with the occasional landing pad here and there for these box drop-off missions, but nothing more beyond that. So the team has just finished off their concept development, which is where they explore a vast array of potential, sort of inspirational building interior ideas, to then pitch to the directors and inspire conversations and what they want to do and how they should go forwards. Now it began with a breakdown of what a single building could consist of, and starting at the top, you have the rooftop, which can act as a primary access point for us, the players, with landing pads like we see already. Below that, there are maintenance spaces that could be industrial or technical. Then you have your residential section, which could make up an entire building or just a portion of, more on this soon, followed by commercial spaces and floors for shopping, offices, restaurants, and so on and so forth. You have a lobby, a reception, or communal areas. And then finally, you have the underground levels, or the underground floors, which could be subways, sewers, maintenance tunnels, or lower access points, and could also act as a connecting space between buildings. So talking further about these rooftops, as you can see here, there are potential concepts for interesting landing spaces, and these don't have to be right on the top of the building. They could be midway down, lower down. These also open the potential for not just a single building with a landing pad, but kind of a network hub that services many different buildings, like a mini transit hub where many players could come and land, get the transit to the different buildings that they need to get to. Now what I really love is how it's not just going to be a simple rooftop pad like what we see, but a variety of options that could have us flying low through a city as we make our approach, which would be very cool inside the building or inside an apartment, looking out and watching the occasional ship coming and passing by, actually seeing the pilot. Now next up we have the maintenance spaces, so this is the next level down, and this could hold a lot of potential for player interaction, housing many of the building's components like power and general maintenance, but some buildings might have more technical spaces for dealing with data or communications. And I would love to see maybe a security level where you can see security cameras for that building itself, and if you get access, you can unlock doors, turn off the cameras, or manipulate them, so on and so forth. Now, moving on to my favourite level, we have the residential spaces. Now, these hold a huge amount of potential, and what they're doing with these sections is firstly exploring the variety of architectural styles, while simultaneously investigating the player housing with a variety of interior layouts. And when looking into housing layouts, they are wanting something modular so that they can create a range of combinations quickly, be that living spaces, habitation, or just general social areas. Now, what is so fascinating to me about this specific section is that these habitation spaces will be available to the players to buy in-game, like an apartment or a house, ranging from low-end to high-end and everything in between. So giving players real estate to own a homestead as such, but not built by ourselves, already found and established in cities, physically there, and seeing these new concept images has got me very excited to see these come along. A great idea as well to use this opportunity to investigate player housing or static player housing, as it will be so good to visit a new landing zone, look around, see an apartment, check out the view, think you might want to buy that one or rent it. That would be so cool. Now also the variety of style here will range drastically based on where they are located. Orison, for example, having more high-end styles compared to something like Area 18, although I'm sure in most locations the option for either will be available, but these low-end spaces look very cyberpunky in style, which would be a great place to live in Area 18. I'd love to own an apartment in Area 18, like, was it Z from Cyberpunk? I think that was the main protagonist where they lived, but being able to look out of a window and actually see the world down below alive and moving with rain coming in. Oh, I've been dreaming of these days. Anyway, with these sections, just outside of the living quarters are the social spaces, and these are more than just corridors, but more multi-layered social spaces with potentially advanced traversal spaces for a wider range of access points. So below these residential spaces, we have commercial areas as well underneath, meaning locations with more potential gameplay like offices, corporate wings, manufacturing and so on, and these are to be more multi-tiered with a lot of traversal options as well, and these spaces could also include restaurants or bars. Anyway, moving down to the ground floor, we have spaces like a lobby, and these locations act as ground floor access points for the player and NPCs, but not just a simple foyer, offering access to shops and stalls and even underground transit networks, feeding a network of building lobbies, offering great combat or social spaces, again, low-end versus high-end styles and just different for each landing location. But can you imagine looking at some of these spaces, tracking a bounty through these social spaces and running through the streets with a taser, trying to track them down? That would be so cool. Anyway, we finally get to the last level, and it is the underground spaces. And once again, there is huge potential for play space outside of the building itself, with underground transit networks that could be operational or even abandoned. And they did say it would be cool to come across a underground street racing network. It could also open up the option of traversal access from one building to another unnoticed. If there's one that you need to get to and you can't go through the lobby because it's restricted, you might be able to access it via the sewer, allowing the players to think about what is the best approach. It's kind of like a 3D space where you could go in from the top, the bottom, underground. So much potential there. But also, they did say that there could be like an aqueduct underground, which would also be ideal for street racing. Anyway, as mentioned, this was just a concept exploration for what potential styles and areas that we could see come to all these landing zones, just helping to further flesh out the gameplay spaces, but also the believability of cities, while simultaneously exploring player habitation, which I know not just myself, many of you are all very excited for player housing, be that built by ourselves or purchasable pre-built locations. And this is all part of a much bigger initiative which we can see now with the Lorville 2.0, where every city in the game is going to be ready for these interiors, which they did say will mean many of the cityscapes of these cities will change to accommodate these interiors because they do require bigger buildings. But what is very exciting is that these interior spaces have already gone into full production and are now no longer just concept images. But personally, I find all of this pretty mind-blowing in terms of scale and scope that CIG are aiming for when it comes to their cities. Obviously, a game like Cyberpunk or Grand Theft Auto, where they have these pre-built, dedicated cities, allows them to focus purely on the city and building them out to be very visceral. Whereas on a planet, multiple planets, having different landing zones, it is very much a different approach because you cannot just dedicate it to this one play area. But having these kinds of locations coming in and having big built-up areas in cities, and I can just imagine combining it with roads for many of the cities, maybe not all the cities, but many of them, there will be plenty to keep us highly entertained in one location, one landing zone, for a long period of time without even feeling the need to take off in our ships, let alone visit another planet, a moon, or even another system. Not to mention, my favourite part of this whole show is that they are exploring the potential player housing. A great episode, and I really look forward to checking in more with how the building interiors advance, but that was Inside Star Citizen, well, not Inside Star Citizen, Journey to 4.0. Let us move on to Star Citizen Live. So, to kick off this week's Star Citizen Live, we met with 4 members of the vehicle teams, talking all about their work with CIG. These are all very long-standing members of the Star Citizen dev teams, so great to catch up with many faces that we actually used to see quite a lot of in the past years ago, but not so much anymore. Now, this segment wasn't exactly a Q&A episode, more of a casual chat with the team members, learning more about them as individuals and how they got into the world of game development and eventually CIG. And the reason for this team's visit to the UK was actually to attend the ship summit in which these developers from all the ship-related teams and more meet to work out the New Year's ship plans. Now, it was also mentioned that they are building the new ship team in the Turbulence studio in Montreal, and that members of the existing ship teams around the world will be assisting with this as they help flesh out the new team, but nothing more was really mentioned on that subject. One developer did say that they are actively working on the Hull C, and this ship is a big culmination of a lot of technology, and right now he's currently working on the walkways to take you from the front to the back, and how it feels more like an experience as it extends, working with the audio team to make this experience the best it can be, which does sound pretty epic, and I wouldn't be surprised if they show that off on a Inside Star Citizen at some point soon. Now, they did say also the SanTokYai is in production, currently finishing up with its white box, with the intention of then moving on to the Origin X1 after that. So that would be very cool. This is a sleek hover bike, as you can imagine, from Origin. But beyond this, they do say that all the ship teams are working on some really cool ships that they cannot discuss today, but they are doing some new cool things not yet done before. And I do believe there are around 5 new unannounced vehicles in the works, so very excited to see what these are. You will learn a little bit more about these in the PU monthly report video that I'm putting out, but I think it has just been revealed that maybe one of these is a new variant of the Scorpius. If I was to guess, it seems like it's going to be some sort of interdicting Scorpius with a EMP perhaps, but outside of it being a Scorpius variant, I don't think we know much else. And this will actually release in the 3.18 Live build, so it's coming very soon. Now, for the second part of Star Citizen Live, they began by checking out some of the cool toys found around the new Star Citizen Live studio. Then the show moved on to members of the various lighting teams throughout the world, with a couple of the members saying that they are working on the new Lorville skyline. They also did say that they have been working on pyro, specifically new locations like the space stations, colonialism outposts, and underground facilities. There are some very cool locations coming to the burst. But to finish off the show, Jared did kind of an impromptu whiteboard session explaining how the builds for Star Citizen work and how they are all worked out until release, from game dev, staging, release, stability, live. Now, for those interested in learning more about how CIG go about putting these builds together and testing features and assets to the full live release for players, I highly suggest watching it. It was around the 40-minute mark. I cannot explain it better than Jared did, but it really illustrates what went on last year and this year regarding the 317 point patches, and how 3.18 is going to follow a similar pattern while they are working on getting things like persistent entity streaming working, stable, and server meshing stable. A great section, and kudos to Jared for putting that together, because it really helps to just understand the processes behind closed doors. Anyway, next week's Inside Star Citizen is dedicated to the Server Meshing Summit that went on last month, talking about the new plans for server meshing, so it should be very interesting to hear what they are planning to do. So also this week, the Squadron 42 monthly report was reposted to the comlink. I have already covered this in a separate video, which I will link below. And the same goes for the roadmap update. The link to my video coverage of the changes is also linked in the description below. Coromore kicked off this week, which is essentially Valentine's Day in the verse, holding new competitions and giveaways and sales for ships and equipment. And finally, the new community hub was launched, which we heard about during CitizenCon. This has been heavily cleaned up with much more improved usability, so if you make content or want to check out some content, be sure to follow the link to this new community hub.
So that brings us to the end of the show. If you do enjoy my content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, I am able to do this thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members. If you appreciate what I do and would like to help make it even better from as little as $1 a month, all of the links are provided below.